My talk today is about using Figshare for data sharing. I'm a product specialist at Figshare, and just a super quick background on me. I used to work in the natural history field. I worked at a small natural history museum and biological collections, and I did really biodiversity research, especially with invertebrates, spiders, beetles, all of that stuff. But I became really interested in data management and how to make sure the things I was collecting and working on would be available for future researchers. So I went to library school, graduated in 2020, and in graduate school, I really focused on data curation and learned a lot about repositories. And so here I am working at Figshare and sharing the love of repositories and data management. So we got one more in the chat. Okay, great. Yeah. So my talk is going to be, around 45 minutes. But I hope that if there are any questions, please just interrupt me or put it in the chat. I'll try to keep my eye on that. And I'll definitely, there'll be time at the end for questions as well. So for those of you who are brand new to Figshare, Figshare is a repository platform for storing, sharing, accessing, and citing research outputs of all different types. And it was started specifically for data, but in the last 10 years, people have been using it for everything. So papers, theses, teaching materials, conference outputs, and so on. And Figshare has two real offerings. So one is for researchers. It's a free account. You can start sharing your research materials with just a few clicks. And then people often ask, like, what's your kind of sustainability model? How do you fund yourself? And we have another offering for institutions and organizations. So universities, government agencies, research organizations, really anybody who might need a repository of their own. They can license Figshare, and there are a bunch of administrative tools and all that come with that. So that's how we continue to develop the product and how we continue to support the free Figshare for everyone to use. And so today I'm really focusing on the individual researcher. What can you do with just a free account on Figshare? And as required for all data sharing talks, just want to go over some of the basics. So why share your data? Why share the non-traditional research outputs that are produced alongside a published paper or behind a published paper? Number one, funder and publisher policies and data sharing mandates. These are increasing, becoming more common, and also expanding in scope. A great example is the NIH, which I guess it's the biggest biomedical funder in the world. They are expanding their policies starting this coming January, requiring data management plans for all funded research. And they've made some overtures that this is really important for funding and for the success of your funding. So it's really important to think about it. And data management plans are all about, what are you going to do with your data? How are you going to make it available? How are you going to be able to give access to it as appropriate? Same with all the major government agencies, NSF, so on, have some type of policy, and they're increasingly getting more granular. Private funders also, require funding in some cases. I think the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation just require data sharing. But then there are also these altruistic options or reasons to share your data: transparency and reproducibility. Just make it easier for people to build on your work, make it easier for people to understand your work and reproduce your work. And then you don't have to just do this, out of the kindness of your heart. You can get credit for these other outputs. If you didn't publish a paper in the last year, but you made data available for people to reuse, maybe some code that's out there, you can get credit for that. You can get cited for that. You can use a repository to basically show your impact and all these other things that you do that's part of your research. And then finally, this is the one that really why I am so interested in repositories, along with all these other things, but perpetual findability, bringing some stability to your research outputs so that people far in the future will be able to find them and use them and build on them. Just using any old website to store your outputs, the URLs change, people won't be able to find it again. Putting a data available upon request, statement in a paper, it's very unlikely that you'll be able to fulfill that request in 100 years. So better to put it in a repository where everybody can find it. But you don't want to just make files available and just say, here's my data. It's really good to do it in the proper way, to follow some standards that have been developed over the last 5, 10, 15 years. And currently those standards, those principles are called the FAIR principles. This is from a paper in 2016. And you can see it hugely influential. It already, I'm sure it's more now, it has over 3,500 citations. And FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And so you want your outputs to be findable. Digital object identifiers, these DOIs are really important. You want the metadata to be of a standard schema. You want these pages that your resources are on to be discoverable on search engines and Google dataset search and so on. You want everything to be accessible, not be on a paywall. Anybody can just get on the internet and find it. Interoperable is about the metadata being of like a standard schema, so that it can be mapped to other schemas and have a lot of linking. So you're linking to other digital objects, you're linking to funder records, you're linking to your ORCID record. And then finally, reusable is about having a license that says how your objects can be reused, and providing a lot of good quality metadata so that people understand how, what you did, what the data means, where to find certain things in this set of files that you're sharing. Now, so why Figshare? Well, Figshare basically does all of this for you, and it provides you with the time to focus on your data and filling in all the metadata. And I do want to just plug the libraries here, because libraries have stepped into this role of helping researchers with metadata and figuring out the best ways to share their research outputs. So, when in doubt, go to your library, they can help you. And the fact that you're at this talk or watching this recording later probably means you're already doing that. So good work. Figshare began in 2010 by a researcher, stem cell biologist. He was, I think he was maybe a postdoc at the time, Mark Hannell. He had this exact problem, like, how do I share some research outputs, figures, and videos in a fair way, even though the term fair didn't exist back then? And there was just no place for it. He could not share a 5 megabyte video anywhere in a way that was like citable. So he built Figshare, people started using it and liking it. And now Figshare is 10 years old. It's used around the world. Over 500,000 people use it. These are some of the figures that Mark was trying to share. And that's where the name comes from, actually, Figshare. I always thought it had to do with figs, but turns out it's all about figure sharing. So just a really high level overview, you can share almost anything on Figshare. The terms we have it just needs to be related to research, academic work. You can create several different types of objects. So items are the basic record. You can hold up to 500 files. You can publish up to 20 gigabytes at a time. We can raise that for you if you're like, I have 25 or I have 70 gigabytes. We can raise your count limit if you need to. Projects are a collaboration space where you can work with colleagues as you prepare material to be made public or not. And collections are a way to showcase and group items and then cite them. And as I mentioned before, signing up is free. All you really need is an email and a last name, and you can do that. And I encourage you, right now, go to figshare.com and sign up with an account. You can follow along, even if you don't ever use the account. You can follow along as I show some examples later. We were getting a lot of requests for really big data sharing. They're like, can you raise my account limit to 900 gigabytes? And as you can imagine, storing that amount of data is really expensive. So we launched a service called Figshare Plus, which is specific to these needs and just gives it a way to kind of fund it so that we can store these things for the long term. So basically anything, if you have anything over 250 gigabytes, there's a data publishing / storage charge, and you can write that into your grant. You can write it into your lab budget, whatever the case is, and that comes with some curation assistance. So we'll help you kind of make sure your metadata is high quality and that you're doing everything right. So this is available if you have really big data sets that you'd like to share. And I couldn't really figure out anywhere else to put this, so I put it here, but Figshare is a generalist repository. And of course, you may have heard this, if you should always look for a disciplinary repository first, one that specializes in the type of data that you are producing, that your field produces. If that doesn't exist, always look at your institutional repository too. It's good if things are kind of kept, in one place. If you're producing it at an institution, it's nice if it's in that repository. But if for whatever reason neither of those options work, then a generalist repository it's why they exist for the times when you don't have other options. And so Figshare is one of those generalist repositories that you can use. Kind of a busy slide, but I just wanted to kind of show that there are lots of features in Figshare for you to use. So things around flexibility, making the workflow easier to get data into Figshare and prepare it for publication. Lots around metadata and persistent identifiers, things to help with open access, and then ways to track impact, reporting, see how your research is being used. But you don't need to use or know about all of these things to start sharing data on Figshare. It's very easy to just share away. And I'll show you, so if you're just trying to make some like a data set, like one tabular data file available in a fair way, all you need on Figshare are a few things. Figshare allows you to upload anything, any file type. You have all these options to connect to other services and identifiers. So ORCID, you link to maybe the published paper, link to your funder record, so on, get a DOI. And then you apply a license and Figshare makes it discoverable and citable and you're ready to go. It's very easy. And I actually, when I first shared data from my own research life, I was looking at a lot of repositories while I was in library school. And I chose Figshare because it was just so intuitive. It was so easy for me. I was a little scared, I'm like, I'm going to make this public and like, how do I do this? Figshare was just really easy to use. And I hope you see that shortly. Just one other example though, your research might not be simple, might not be just one tabular data file, might be images, videos, all sorts of things. And it can be complicated figuring out how do I package this all together so that it's reusable and I can cite it in a paper. Here's an example, just lots of different file types, and I'll actually show this later. But, there are many features within Figshare to make all of that possible. So share any file type, can share really, really big files. Lots of files preview directly in the browser, so you can really showcase your research and help people understand what's going on. You can use this collections feature to group things and put them all in one place. Of course, persistent identifiers important no matter what you're doing. And you also get an author profile. So as you can see all of your work in one place, and it shows you some aggregated statistics. So here's just a screenshot of a profile. It's connected to ORCID. You can see views, downloads, and citations up here. This is a little tiny. And some biography information. It automatically puts in the coworkers and collaborators. And then you see all the things that this person has shared on Figshare. So a nice way to just say, oh, here's all my stuff in one place. So with that, I want to show some examples. And once again, if you have questions, just unmute, yell out, or just put it in the chat. I'm going to start on Figshare.com, the homepage, and feel free to follow along. Actually, I'd be interested. You can try searching for your discipline or whatever you're interested in here, and just see what comes up on Figshare. So this is the main Figshare site, Figshare.com. I'm going to click into the search bar here. Figshare.com is really the kind of main portal for all Figshare repositories. So universities using Figshare, government agencies, research labs using Figshare for their own repositories. All of their items still show up in this main search page. So you see there are almost 6 million results here. And all of this is highly discoverable, shows up in Google, DuckDuckGo. A lot of things are actually indexed in Google Scholar. Datasets show up in Google Dataset Search. So, this is a great way to make your research findable for everyone. And there are facets down the side here to be able to find things and narrow down results. And you can see that people are sharing lots of different things here. Data sets are very common, obviously, but images, educational resources, a lot of this stuff is kind of in the non-traditional research output sphere. So I'm just going to search. We have advanced search syntax. I'm going to search title, frog. See what that brings up. So 1,600 results, and we see that some are coming from publishers. Public Library of Science uses Figshare. University of Wyoming, this is a special collection item. And some things are just coming from figshare.com. And so I'm going to click on this one. I'm going to open in a new window. So this record, or in Figshare lingo, this item has two files. We can preview these files directly in the browser. So a text file, and then this FNA file. And as we scroll down, we see the metadata. Really importantly, anything you put on Figshare receives a digital object identifier. So this is absolutely essential. It provides a way to always find this record, even if this record moves to a new location far in the future. The metadata and most likely the files will always be findable through this DOI. You can also grab the citation in any format you want, really. So making it easy for you to get cited, for someone to reuse your work appropriately. A couple other things. So this is on Figshare.com. This person just published this. They put in all the required metadata, but they didn't necessarily fill in as much as they could have. So description is a little bit lacking. Could use some more. There's a reference option that you'll see, some grant funding options that you'll see. So this could have, once again, a little plug for the libraries. Talking to your librarian can help fill this out appropriately, choose the right keywords, and so on. One thing that this group did do really well, though, was they put that DOI in the paper that they published. And because of that, it shows up here as a citation. So when I click on this link, it's going to take us to the Dimensions database. This is it's a sister company of Figshare's. We're all under this umbrella of digital science, a much bigger company. And Dimensions is just a massive database, over 30 million right now, publications, data sets, all this stuff. Because we have this relationship with Dimensions, though, Dimensions will tell us when a paper cites a Figshare record, and then we can use that as a citation count. So here we see this paper that they published using that data. So they mentioned that DOI somewhere in that paper. Close that. Okay, so this is a nice, simple example of a relatively straightforward data sharing. I brought up a bunch of other examples to show you what these things look like before I show you how to actually do this for yourself. So here's an example of a lot of CSV files. Once again, we can preview them, see if this looks like data we could reuse, perhaps, or build on. The metadata is much more extensive here. And in particular, I wanted to point out this funding metadata field. So if you have funding for research and maybe you're facing the policy, it's like, we really like you to share your data, make it as open as possible. You can add them to your Figshare record. And when I click on this link, once again, opens up Dimensions. This time it's opening up the Dimensions grant records. And so we can see this grant. And so it's an NSF grant. You can see similar grants and publications that have come from this grant. And because this is linked, the grantor, NSF, now can know about that Figshare record, know about your research. So it's really nice to be able to report back to your grantors and show these links. Let's see, I don't think there's anything else I wanted to show necessarily on here. So this other example, lots of different file types. If you have a very complex set of supplementary material or data, we have text files, MATLAB code, figures, PDFs. The videos we can view directly in the browser. So I could be reading this paper and watch the dog drinking water at the same time. And once again, nice metadata mostly. They didn't link, so you can still type in a grant number into the grant metadata field, but they didn't link it. So I'm going to show you how to make sure that it's linked appropriately. Just a few other examples. Figshare will preview lots of different file types, over 1,200. Most of those are text, but you'll see Figshare previews 3D files. So you can zoom in, take a look at this allosaur tooth, and then download it and 3D print it. And then images also are really well previewed in Figshare. And I think a lot of time people are thinking about data and they're thinking tabular data. And that's absolutely essential to make open as possible. But you may be producing a lot of other things that are useful to share. So, things that are communicating your research, infographics, whatever they may be. I think most people have seen this before, the Swiss cheese respiratory defense picture. This is just on Figshare.com. You can see that it's gotten a lot of attention. So every Figshare record receives an altmetric score if it's been tweeted or shows up in any kind of social media. You can click on that badge and it takes you to our other sister company, Altmetric. And Altmetric just tracks attention to digital objects across the internet. So we can see where all the tweets are coming from for this particular image. We can look at what news items have mentioned that DOI from this record, blogs. You can actually read all the tweets about it. So really great way to find out how people are talking about your research. I'll go back to it for a moment. The other thing I wanted to mention here is that you can version your records, and sometimes funder policies may want that sometimes. So I think for the NIH, one of the things they look for in repositories is that you can version. Don't quote me on that, but so this record has been versioned many times. We can go back and see version 1, and this is great. You can make edits, you can update your data, but as people cite it over time, they'll always be able to find the exact one that they cited. So here's the very first version of this particular image. Okay, I just want to kind of mention how you can package things together to make it easier to cite them or to showcase. And I mentioned collections in the slide presentation. This is an example of a collection. It's Zika data collected from all over Figshare. A couple things to note. It has a title. It has a description right here. We could follow this collection. There's one author. And it has a DOI. So the collection itself receives a DOI. The collection itself can be cited properly. And because of that, it can have its own citations. It can have its own altmetric badge. So its attention can be tracked across the internet. But as I scroll down, we see all the items that are part of this collection. So these are all individual records. They could have 0 to many files in them, but they're all in one place. And we could cite basically all of these together by citing this collection. The other thing you can do, though, so I'll go back to, for example, this record. You can embed your records in your website. So I clicked on this little embed link. You can grab this HTML and drop that into our website. And it looks, this is on the British Museum. This is a British Museum project here. As I scroll down, we see these embedded Figshare videos and images. And they just play directly in your website. And I'm not sure you could hear that, but there's definitely sound. And you can go see the record or download the object or share it on social media. So nice way to kind of showcase and organize your research. Okay, so are there any questions or anything? I'll just pause for a moment.
So
okay,
I actually have a question. The collection thing, is there any restrictions, or I mean, do you have to get permission from the other authors to be included in that collection, et cetera?
Yeah, good question. That's actually a great question. Because, so no, as long as something is public, it can be reused, but you do need to pay attention to the license. So if I just went into this one record, it has a license down here, Creative Commons by 4.0. So basically all this is saying is you just have to attribute the author, cite them, and you can reuse this for anything you need to. It's So short answer is no. You can put anything in a collection. Doesn't have to. You don't have to contact the author as long as it's a public thing, and the system won't let you add anything else other than public items. The other kind of like point to this is that it's really important to choose as open a license as possible. And this is advice from everybody. Basically, is if possible, put a CC0 license on. Can I see one of these that had a CC0? No, that's by. Yeah, okay, here we go. So I know this is kind of down at the bottom of the screen. I can zoom in. This license is the most open, and it says you can use this for whatever you want. And we're just trusting you to use your, the basic scientific or research paradigm of citing where you got things from and give credit to the author. But using a very open license means that people can take that work, package it together, reuse it, attribute as needed, but not have to worry about being like, well, these things are all open, but this one says we can't use it in this way, but we want to use all of these things together. They're restricted basically by the most restrictive license. So a little plug for using the most open license. Went a little bit off tangent there, Kay, but hopefully that answered your question. So I want to take the next, I don't know, 15 minutes, talk about how you actually upload into Figshare and some of the important things to think about, especially if you're thinking about trying to adhere to a data sharing policy, or maybe you're just beginning a project and you're thinking about how are you going to manage the data and where you're going to put it. Always good to think about that from the very beginning. So first of all, we have a very comprehensive help site, help.figshare.com. In fact, most people I think just Google like Figshare and how do I upload a big file or something like that. Works great, but it all comes from this big help site. There are lots and lots of user guides. And what those guides look like is something like this. So we have a guide to sharing NIH funded research on figshare.com with a huge amount of advice and information. So to make sure that you're going to adhere to if you're funded by NIH, that you're going to follow do what you need to do to adhere to the policy that NIH puts out. So lots and lots of information here. And if you ever have any questions, I'll put my email address up at the end, and you can always, I can help point you to resources if you can't find it for some reason. So everything I'm going to talk about today is documented on this help site. I am going to use a sandbox instance of Figshare to demonstrate some of this stuff, just so that I can delete things and make mistakes and not make things, public that shouldn't be public yet. So the sandbox instance I use is called Faber College. You can just imagine this is figshare.com. And I'm going to log in as a researcher named Lewis. So this is the Figshare private side, and it's designed to be easy to use and not overwhelming. So we have the My Data tab, which is just all the records that this person owns and has made public or not. There could be just drafts in here that they're working on. The Projects tab is a collaboration area, which I'll mention in a bit. Collections is, again, that place where you can group things together. So I've added 2 things into this group. An activity is just where if you got invited to a project, that would show up here and you could accept or decline it. And I just also want to point out that there are a few other windows that you have access to. So your profile page is where, of course, you can add an image, can put in some information about yourself, add a biography, and add your publications. This is also one of the places where you can link to ORCID. And I hope all of you have heard of ORCID, but if not, it's an identifier for researchers. Really helps to identify you. Even if you change your name later, as long as your ORCID is on with all your publications and data sets, they can always be attributed to you. And we recently upgraded our ORCID integration. So you can see I can connect to ORCID here. I brought up another blog post about this. So this was just August last year. And sorry for all the scrolling. I'm just going to scroll down to this window here. When you integrate with your ORCID account, you can allow it to, you can either just have it so it just shows your ORCID on your account, or you can have anything you put on Figshare can be pushed into ORCID. So the metadata will be there, the citation will be there. So when people look at your ORCID profile, they see anything that you put on Figshare. the two things that we added recently where you can actually pull information from ORCID to fill out that biography section, sorry, not the biography section, the publication section of your profile. And you can also create draft records of publications. So this is if you were you wanted to make an open access version of a paper available, and the publisher allowed you, maybe after 12 months, you could make their copy available. This is probably more applicable to those at institutions using Figshare, because most likely for open access papers, you should talk to your institutional repository about the best place for those. But lots of ways to integrate with ORCID here. Couple other things: settings, change your password. Applications is where you can connect to various tools. So this is kind of getting into that workflow situation. If you use GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, there are built-in integrations. You can connect there and basically create snapshots, citable snapshots of your project. So if you have a software project in GitHub and you use it for a paper analysis or analysis in a paper, and you want to say, like, here's the code I used to do this analysis, you can snapshot that automatically into Figshare and cite it. And as you develop your software more, people can read your paper and they can find the exact version of the software that you used. So that's the benefit of that. You can get FTP login details. This is where you can upload like 100 files all at once. It makes it easier, or really big files. And then finally, as I will mention later, it's where you can also create tokens to use with the API. Okay, so how do you create an item on Figshare? It's probably the meat of the whole presentation here. It is as easy as clicking on this, create a new item. This little pop-up shows up, and this is all getting an overhaul in the next year or so for accessibility compliance. So all the public-facing Figshare pages are accessible, but the private side work is underway. So the first thing up here is you can drag and drop, I think anywhere on the screen, files to upload. You can also create a metadata-only record. You could say these are data specimens, that are in my lab or something like that. Or if you have like a huge special set of data somewhere, you can provide a link to that file so that people can find that. And the point of using Figshare is that you can get a DOI for that, so a citable record. So I'm just going to drag and drop some things in here. You can put, as I mentioned, up to 500 files, all different types, and they'll all just upload together. Good descriptive title is really important. And then you can add authors, whether they have a Figshare account or not. So, here's this account person. I can try looking up myself. I don't know if I'm even in here. I am. I'm inactive, but I can add myself. And you can also just add people who don't have a Figshare account. So Jane, they aren't there. I can just add them. Really great if they have an ORCID, include that. And then they'll be on this record. Really, the only required thing is a last name to add folks. I just want to close. Okay. Anything with a green dot is a required metadata field. Most of it is required to mint the DOI, that digital object identifier. Categories come from a standard taxonomy of categories. You have to choose at least one. You can choose many if you like. And then choosing your item type is really important to help group and categorize things. And it's also important for discoverability. So data sets, for example, get indexed by Google Scholar, Google Dataset Search. Journal contributions, I believe reports, theses, they all get indexed by Google Scholar along with search engines. So do think about that as you're uploading. One that always gets people is Figure. That's what you use for images. And there's a tooltip here to give you ideas about what should be shared for those. I'll just choose data set. Keywords come from a database, and you can add keywords. So keyword, I think I've added this before into this database. You can choose from that, and you can also add new ones to the database. Always good to think about keywords that will help people find your material. So think about other ways that people would search for the, whatever your research is about. Now you're seeing something that isn't launched yet, but will be out in 8 days, I believe. So next week, this new, more advanced description box with a lot of features for formatting. It used to be a lot simpler, but now we can, add different heading types, can add links directly into the record, and so on. And you just have to have some. I think right now the requirement is like three characters, but the more descriptive, the better. Help people understand how they can use your research. This is that funding metadata element that's so important to use properly. So you can type in, my grant, and it'll just show up on your record. But it's really great if you know your grant number. If it's in the Dimensions database, it will show up in this list, and you can select that, and it will then create that link to the funding record in your data set. So really good to use that appropriately. These two fields are actually only available to institutions, but we're about to change things that will allow you to provide context for references, which is what this is. So, I can just put I think I have a URL here saved somewhere. So I have this DOI. Oops, continue editing. I can put that in here. Coming in, I think in the next, coming sometime this year, I believe, you will be able to put this link in and say, this is this supplements this data set, or this supplements this published paper. So you'll be able to have that contextualized link there. And then using Figshare.com, you only have access to open licenses. So you can't choose a license that says like non-commercial. That we want to encourage open sharing, and kind of going back to that problem of if everybody was kind of using restrictive licenses, it makes it much harder for things to be reusable, and kind of undermines the whole purpose of making data open and findable. So chose an open license there. Custom field, this is part of institutional stuff, so you wouldn't see this in your account. A couple last things. You can edit the timeline. So if this is something, a report that, or data set or report that has a date on it, and you want to line that date up with the Figshare record, so it's correct in the citation, you can choose that here. So the first online date, and you can change that to whatever you need it to be. Couple other things that are really important. You can embargo items. So if it's something that you don't want to be available for people for a while, you can embargo that for really any amount of time. I think it goes, I don't remember the timing, like up to 40 years in the future, maybe something like that. You can choose a specific date. You can embargo files only, or the entire content, but usually people just embargo the files, so your metadata is still discoverable. People can know about your research and see that, oh, it's going to be available in 12 months. Great. And then you can give a title and a reason for why it's embargoed. I'm not going to embargo this. So a couple other things that are useful for the peer review process. There's a generate a private link option here. So this link now is, I'm going to save this too. So this link can be shared with anyone, and it'll show an anonymous version of this record. So let's see, I'll open a new, see if I can find, I have so many tabs open here. Okay. Oops. Guess I need to sign in. Okay, there we go. You would not have to sign in. This is just because I'm in a sandbox instance here. So here we have this record, and you'll see that this item is shared privately. So the authors are not here. There's no way for the authors to know that I'm looking at this record. So you can create these private links and share them with as part of a peer review process. And that way your reviewers can look at your data as they're reading your manuscript, and be able to see the whole of your research. And then when you're done, you can just disable that, and they won't be able to access that anymore. The last thing I'll mention is the reserving a digital object identifier. This is really useful for when you're submitting that manuscript. Reserve the DOI, put it in your paper, so that your paper gets linked to your record and vice versa. Put it in the references, put it in the data availability statement, whatever the case may be. So that's also there. And then when you're ready, you would click publish, and you'd publish that item. Because this is a kind of like a test site, there's a review process turned on. On Figshare.com, it would just become public. And it's important to remember, once you publish it, to remove it, you'd have to send in a support request. So the whole point is that this becomes available permanently so that people can always find it. And if you find a mistake, the best thing to do is to just version it. You can change that record. So I'll just save this here. At any time, you can go in and edit a record. These are all public records. I can just edit it. And when I publish it, it will create a new version, depending on what I changed. Okay, so that was kind of a long description there, but hopefully that was pretty clear, and hopefully you saw it's relatively easy to share your research. The other, I am keeping my eye on the time. The one thing, the next thing I wanted to talk about was projects, because I think this is really useful for people, not just researchers, even librarians, as you're preparing data for publication. So projects are where you can collaborate with anyone with a Figshare account. For example, here's this interdepartmental collaborative project. And so this account, Lewis, has been invited onto this project. I guess this account created this project, okay, and invited someone else. And we can see that there's, there are 2 people in the project. There's some metadata. We could make this, actually this project is public. You don't have to make your project public. The collaboration part happens in that anyone can add items. You can add comments. So I can create a new comment here. And you can comment on other people's items. So I can make a comment like, oh, see, I already commented, looks great. So I won't make another comment, but you can comment on things. The one restriction is you can't make changes to someone else's data or files. So I can see that this person, Laszlo, has shared this really big file. It's not public. He can't, no one can see it except those who are part of this project. And I can see it, just by clicking here. So even though it's a draft in his account, I can still download this supposedly really big file, just an image of the monkey selfie. I can read all the metadata. So this is a good way to, to work on data together or to provide access to a data set, but still kind of maintain the editing control. Yeah, I'll close that too. The other kind of use case for projects, I mean, there are lots of them, but is if you are preparing data for publication and you want some help from an expert, a librarian, someone who's really good at providing metadata, or saying like, hey, you need to add a README file, and like I found a typo in your README file, whatever it is. You can use projects for that. So here, this account has created this project and invited this this admin person as a collaborator. And remember, this can be anybody across Figshare. And that way, that admin now can access all the files that have been added, can leave comments about them. And then Lewis here, whenever they're ready, they can just directly from the project publish that item when they've made all the changes that they need to make. So a nice way to help curate and make data as findable and as discoverable as possible. Okay, so a few other things I just want to mention, just kind of the, like the extras, like what else can you do with Figshare? Maybe you're making your data available, some other research outputs available. You're using projects maybe to collaborate with people. And I should mention, actually, just in my own private life, I'm using projects to collaborate on this like database project. We're sharing files in between, maybe to make public, maybe not. So that, there are all these use cases, but there are other things that you can do with Figshare. And a lot of that is around the API. And I just wanted to mention, kind of show you like that this exists. So an API is an application programming interface, just allows you to access the metadata and files in Figshare without going through the interface. And it also provides a few tools that are useful or that may be useful. And I'm going to show you 3 quick examples. So we have this help page that kind of just describes like, this is how you can start using the API as a researcher or as an administrator if you run a Figshare repository. And there's some examples here, I'll zoom in, of how you can use the API without knowing anything about scripting. And so you can see metadata that you own. You can see public metadata that anybody's put out there. And as I'll show you, you can change the thumbnail preview. So if you put a bunch of things up and you're like, I want this like cool image to be showing up on the Figshare search page, you can change that. And I'll show you how to do that. This is all possible because of the interface allows direct interaccess with the API. And I'll actually drop, I'll just copy this here. I'll put this in the chat just because if you want to follow along, you can. This page, what we're looking at here is all these endpoints, all these ways to interact with various parts of the Figshare platform. And for example, I'm going to go back to our stage instance, and I'm going to change the thumbnail for this file. And I've actually, this use case is real because I actually did it for something that I made public on figshare.com. So the rocket is showing right now as the main image, but I want this image to be the main thumbnail. So a couple things, we have this article or item ID up here. I'm going to copy that. And I have to use a slightly different version of the API documentation because of the stage sandbox instance, but it looks exactly the same. So, in public articles on the left, view article details, I can just paste that ID in here. And this will show me all of the metadata for that record. And I can copy and download this. It's in a JSON format. I can see how big the files are. I can get the download URL for the files. So, all of this information is at hand. If I want to update that thumbnail, I've gone to article version private updates and update the thumbnail. And we need a couple pieces of information here. So the article ID goes in there. The version ID, I really hope this works, is number 2. So we see that's version number 2. And then we just need the ID of the file. And we can see that in the URL. So the Figshare URLs are designed to be understandable and easily shareable. So we got that, that's 2. Now, if all goes well, no like webinar ghosts come in and mess things up, I should be able to switch this preview. Oh, so bad request, classic. So maybe I will have to fail on this attempt. Let me just check one thing. Got the right file ID. Maybe I didn't copy the whole thing. But you may just have to believe me that maybe I'll try version 1 too. No, I won't. We'll give it one more shot. Okay, I'll have to troubleshoot that later. I thought this was going to work great, but as usual, things always go awry. You should be able to do this, and hopefully if you ever try it, it'll work just fine for you, and you won't have any like ghosts bugging it up right now. But that is possible. There are a couple other things you can do. So there are scripts available to download, all of the stats for the files you've shared. I'm going to scroll down here. So examples using scripting. There are example of Jupyter notebooks that you can open and actually run without any programming experience. It uses Google Colab, and you can put your token that you create from your profile in here and start going away. The last thing I'll mention is that the API makes visualization possible. So this record here is labor index data. It's been cited. It has some. It's been cited in tweets and policy sources, and you can see the version is 2,194. So I think it's every month they are updating this with the most recent data, and this is actually the source of a visualization, which I have here. So by going to this page, it's going to take a second to load, and our Shiny app pulls out the most recent data, formats it, and then puts it into a nice chart. So a great example of using the API to both insert, update data, and then also create a visualization that people can actually use to understand the data set. So a really nice use of the API. So finally, to wrap up, I'll just kind of mention what is in the future for Figshare. You might have questions like, well, how do I know that the data that I put on Figshare is going to be safe and be there in a long time in the future? Once again, Figshare Help has the answer to that. We use Amazon S3, so everything is backed up, and you can see how we kind of guarantee the availability of it and the kind of restrictions around that. We also have a preservation workflow. So it is actually backed up. The whole point of this is that we're trying to make things available far into the future. And so that's all there. We have a public roadmap, so you can see what is being developed and what is in the future being developed, planned for development. A lot of this comes from client institutions, but also researchers. So you can make suggestions. You can say, I have this, like myself and all my colleagues and collaborators have this big need. You can make that request, and that can go into the workflow and be discussed by the product team to be added. So you'll see like some big things are coming up this year, the new edit item page, and just coming up this month, that text editor is going to be launched. So a lot of exciting things coming. And the other thing I wanted to mention lastly is related to the NIH. The NIH is doing a great job kind of thinking about generalist repositories and how they fit in with the repository landscape. And they've funded this big initiative called the Generalist Repository Ecosystem Initiative, GRAE. There are 5 other repositories along with Figshare that received funding to work on developing the platform so that there's better kind of interoperability between things. So, and there are more standards around data sharing, just to make it easier for researchers to share information in a really structured and accurate way. And also for end users to be able to reuse that information, that data in a much easier way, have a much easier time to reuse it. So this is really exciting, and we're going to be launching a bunch of various enhancements. They're all going to be open source. That's part of this big project. So I think I'm going to wrap it up there. And if there are any questions, let me know. And I'm actually going to put my email back up. So if you do have questions at any time, please feel free to email me, andrew@figshare.com. If you have general questions, you start an account and something goes wrong, info@figshare.com is the best place to email for that. So if there are questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you again for attending. Really appreciate being here.